Stellenbosch in South Africa, but I will also be with you in person. One of my co-presenters will be with me as well, Dr. Gerard de Villiers, and our third co-presenter this afternoon is Professor Elmarie Costandius. Unfortunately, Prof. Costandius cannot be with us in person. Jointly, we form a group of colleagues at Stellenbosch University who focuses on visual redress at our university. In this presentation, we will give an explanation and update of visual redress as we understand it in the context of Stellenbosch in South Africa. And in this presentation, we will particularly focus on the idea of forced removals within the history of Stellenbosch, an apartheid-linked history in the context of South Africa, and specifically then how the idea, the notion of forced removals played out in the context of a community called Die Vlakte, loosely translated as the Plains, a community that historically linked directly to that of our campus community. On the next slide, we will show our faces. You have seen myself and Gerard. The third photo is of Prof. Elmarie Costandius, our lead in this regard, and Prof. Elmarie will of course also present in this presentation. On the following slide, we share an overview of what we will present on, something of the history of forced removals. We will contextualize that, as I said, within the history of apartheid South Africa, then a history of the community, a community whose story is linked with that of our university, something of the visual redress project linked to the historic community, embedded within the broader visual redress initiative at Stellenbosch University, and then we will make some concluding remarks. A brief background of forced removals in the context of South Africa is that it is, of course, directly linked to the apartheid history. In short, forced removals took place under the auspices of the Group Areas Act that was developed and promulgated between 1950, formally in 1957, and this was really the first phase of forced law changes in the context of South Africa in the apartheid era. Loosely, the apartheid era played out between 1948 and 1994 in South Africa's history. It is perhaps one of the most painful reminders of apartheid, that is, that South Africans were categorized according to the color of their skin, and as part of the Group Areas Act, everyone had to register under a specific understanding of identity linked to your skin color, and in that sense, you could only stay in designated areas designated for a particular cultural group. And as Gatla indicates, this episode in the apartheid story and history is perhaps one of the most humiliating of all. Between 1960 and 1982, about 3.5 million South Africans were forcibly removed, and that out of a total at that stage of about 45 million South Africans. And as you then can see, it played out in the context of the broader city realities of South Africa and affected thousands and thousands of families over generations. Die Vlakte is a particular community, as I indicated, in Stellenbosch, and it is perhaps the best depiction of this historic cruelty in the context of Stellenbosch, a small, medium-sized town in South Africa, currently with about 160,000 residents, where Die Vlakte formed part of the central site of what today is Stellenbosch, linked to the campus of Stellenbosch University, and housed Stellenbosch citizens representative of a variety of backgrounds, cultural groups, histories, stories, identities, and because of forced removals, had to vacate homes and move to areas designated for particular cultural groups. Something of the history of the area of the Vlakte. It was promulgated as a white-only area in 1964. It also meant that of course, the rest of the area around what is today Stellenbosch University was declared a white-only area, meaning that only white South Africans could stay in this area. About 3,700 people classified as so-called colored were moved from this area, that is the center of Stellenbosch, to two neighboring communities, two newly established communities designated for so-called colored people. The effect was that 6 schools, 4 churches, a mosque, 1 cinema, 10 businesses, amongst others, were affected. Some had to close. In fact, all of the schools had to close. Most of the churches had to move. The mosque remained, the cinema closed, and of course, all businesses were affected. It meant, of course, that the displacement led to an area almost completely vacated by the largest majority of its residents, its historic community, and allowed white-only either businesses, and in particular the university, to take in some of the buildings and spaces in the area. The university at that stage, or at least studies at the university, was also reserved for white-only South Africans, and in that sense, the university fed into the apartheid realities of the town. In 2013, a student-linked community-based initiative started, where students of Stellenbosch University commemorated forced removals, and indeed, at least a portion of the student community at that stage acknowledged something of the historic injustices of the past. It led to a full reflection of the history between Die Vlakte and Stellenbosch University, the implications of forced removals, the effects on the university, positive, of course, in terms of possibilities, negative in terms of our community-based relations, and really started a process of restoration and restitution. One of the examples of restitution is that of the Flucta bursary offered by the university to descendants of individuals who stayed in Die Vlakte, a project that is available to descendants up to the 3rd generation of those that stay in Die Vlakte, and who annually supports at least 5 to 10 newly registered students in a cohort of about 50 in total annually.
Okay, so in 2015, there was a project, the commemoration of the forced removals from Die Vlakte. And as Dr. van Rooij also said, that community members took part in the project, as well as students from the English department, as well as the visual arts department. And community members like Mr. Abels, who suggested the bursary, took part in the project, and also other community members like Mr. Paul and Mr. Bisco. Here are some examples of the student projects. You can see some of the titles: When People Became Furniture, House Installation, or there were some newspapers created during that time, during the project. And here are some of the student reactions to the project, and I'll just read it. What was pertinent to me was that there was a gap between our imaginations and their experience, referring to the people that were forcibly removed. It is easy to disregard paper and to disregard things written on paper, posters and objects, but you cannot ignore stories on people's faces and the passion of their experience. We were informed that after 32 years, the hate and the heartache are still there, and the moment you start talking, it starts boiling, sort of bubbling, and it starts to come back. I'll just read one of the examples. Then in a reaction from one of the community members, people do not see it, the sadness and humiliation, for I have learned by looking on the bright side to joke about it. It's an escape mechanism. It hurts, no doubt about it. I am 77 and it still hurts. It requires swallowing hard to keep the sadness back. No, people do not know what is happening within you. It has left a wound that one cannot heal with medication. With a comment by Mr. Desmond Paul. After the project, the dean gave some money to put the history of the forced removals, an exhibition together in the Arts and Social Sciences building. And there were also examples of the student projects, and there were also a timeline of what happened during the forced removals. Later on, a map of Die Vlakte were also installed at the entrance of the Arts and Social Sciences building. And can also see with these photographs, you'll see with the arrow on the left-hand side, the original area of Die Vlakte, the houses that were in that area of the Vlakte. It's also on the opposite side. That whole area was called Die Vlakte. And then the photograph on the right with the arrow shows that the Art and Social Sciences building, where it is today. Currently, we are working on a project, and that's a follow-up on the project that we did during 2015 and before that. And currently we're working with, again, with community members and specifically with the Vlakte Forum. And the Vlakte Forum committee members specifically suggested that we include more areas, not only Die Vlakte, but also other areas around Stellenbosch where people were forcibly removed. As we said, that the Die Vlakte project is part of a bigger project at Stellenbosch University, and Gerard de Villiers will now talk about the bigger project that's currently running at Stellenbosch University.
Right, so the Visual Redress project aims to change the visual language of the university's campus. It focuses on the removal or contextualization of sensitive artwork or symbols, adding new symbols, updating campus signage, the naming and renaming of buildings, and other such initiatives. It's really about decolonizing and transforming symbols and spaces that were previously hurtful and exclusive into inclusive and welcoming symbols and spaces for all. The term visual redress originated from a student group project on Women's Day in 2013, which addressed the absence of women artworks on campus. And after this project, the term visual redress became a concept that was used in various transformation and social justice related projects on campus. In August of 2015, we distributed an online survey regarding student perceptions of existing artwork on campus. And we also asked them about future statues on campus, who they would like to see represented, and in what sort of manner. In 2015, 2016, a survey was conducted to identify sensitive spaces, places, and symbols on campus. And this was in response to the student protests that were happening not only on our campus, but on university campuses all over the country in those years regarding the need for deeper transformation in many areas of university life. So the Visual Redress project officially began in 2019, which is when we got approval and funding from the university. And so I'll just sort of run through a few of the initiatives that we've done. Signage. Prior to 2016, much of the signage on campus was only in Afrikaans, and this of course excluded those who could not speak or understand the language, and really rendered it inadequate and unwelcoming. And in 2016, we adopted a new language policy. This was renewed again in 2020, and this allowed for the use of isiXhosa and English to be elevated alongside of Afrikaans. So because of this, our signage has been updated to include all three languages, which you can see here. Here you can find some examples of context boards. You can find these all over campus. They're in front of buildings or artworks or even inside residence halls. And they provide clarity and transparency to things such as the reason behind the name of a space, the history of a building, or also the meaning behind artworks. And they're also in all three languages. A popular new-ish artwork is the circle, and this is a sculpture that features 11 women in a seated position on the grass as if in casual conversation with each other. It's in contrast to another figural sculpture in the area, which follows a much more traditional form of a heroic male figure on a pedestal. And for this project, about 300 female students from diverse groups were asked to name their female role models, and the women in the sculpture are drawn from this list. They're a mix of historical figures and current or future leaders. There are 10 known women, which you can see here on the slide, and then an 11th anonymous woman who represents all women. Then welcoming messages in about 16 different languages, which included South Africa's 11 official languages, some local dialects, and then also Braille and sign language, were placed on benches on campus, and there's scope to place more benches with different themes in other areas on campus. The next initiative is these maps, and they've been installed on the outer wall of the library, and they represent all of the smaller outer-lying towns that make up Stellenbosch. These are areas where many people of color live and are communities that were previously marginalized and excluded due to apartheid. And bridge symbols have been added between each map to emphasize the connection to one another and the building bridges that are necessary to create a more unified Stellenbosch. In 2021, the Wilcox Building was renamed the Katoa Building, and this institutional and inclusive process began in 2019 with various stakeholders invited to take part in the renaming initiative. And this included all staff, students, and over 100 community organizations and institutions. So in conjunction with these relevant stakeholders and the leaders and representatives of First Nation structures, the name Katoa was agreed upon and supported. And this is the name of the Khoi woman who was the translator for the Dutch during their founding of the Cape Colony in the 1600s. And the last initiative is the book mural. So we invited students, staff, lecturers to submit book recommendations for inclusion in a book mural to be placed on a large outside wall on campus. And we asked for books they enjoyed reading, those they felt were important, must-reads, and those that aren't published but should be, especially those regarding the injustices of the past. And this mural is in the last phases of production. It'll be up soon. In 2021, we sent out another online survey because we wanted to see whether people were aware of the various initiatives and how they felt about them. So in these two charts, you can see we are gauging the familiarity with the project. Then in this next slide, you'll see we asked which initiative they were most familiar with, and the women's circle was the most recognized, followed by the welcome benches. And then another question that we asked them, which you'll see in the next slide, was to rate their feelings regarding each initiative's contribution to decolonization of space on a scale of 1, which was strongly disagree, to 5, which was strongly agree. And this one is their responses to the women's circle. Then in the next two slides, we're going to show you two publications that we've done about visual redress. This first is from 2021, Evoking Transformation, which was edited by Elmarie and Aslam Fattar. And this book is specifically about visual redress at Stellenbosch University. And then in the next slide, you'll see our new book, which is out this month. It's Visual Redress in Africa from Indigenous and New Materialist Perspectives. And Elmarie and myself edited this. This is an acknowledgement that visual redress is happening worldwide, but we wanted to specifically highlight the work that is happening in Africa, as this is a space that's so often overlooked. And then you'll see here on the right-hand side, we also want to let you know that we're planning a conference on visual redress for early December, and would be delighted should you wish to join us. And yeah, then the next slide is just a concluding remark that we want to leave you with this quote from Prof. Nico Koopman, who is our Deputy Vice Chancellor for Social Impact Transformation and Personnel. So he says, visual redress at our institutions can help to keep the dream of a new society alive. Visual redress as visual envisioning and imagination can mobilize us to work for the realization of the long cherished dream of new campuses and new societies. Thank you.